Ask a Priest Live, and you're listening to the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of the truth with clarity and charity.
Heard around the world on iCatholic Radio on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
Ask a Priest Live. Guided by the Holy Spirit and honoring the magisterial teachings of the Church. Faithful Catholic priests answering questions for believers and those seeking truth. Ask a Priest, because Father knows best. And now, your host, Jordan Pacheco.
God be praised in his angels and in his saints. Hello, everybody, listeners and viewers, all welcome back to Ask a Priest Live. I'm your host, Jordan Pacheco. Hope y'all are having a very wonderful Wednesday. I know that I am. It is good to be back in the saddle. I got to tell you also, I know this is going to sound like really nerdy, technical stuff, but thanks to my priest, Father Nolan at Carmel, I have a new light. So this is a Zion G60. So I'll have to show you guys later. This is like at 10% of its power, and it's a tiny little thing. So what an amazing world we live in, where LED technology has gotten so effective, and film stuff is so portable. An absolutely wonderful place to be in. But you're not here to talk about that. You're here to get your questions answered by some wonderful priests. And that's why we have today Canon Francis Altiere on with me, Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest, out there as rector at Saints Cyril and Methodius in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Canon, I feel like it's been a while since you've been on the show, and I don't know if that's accurate or not, but if it is, it's good to see you again. And if it has been just a short second, it's still good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Jordan. I think the last time, at least, and maybe even the last few times, I was on with one of your colleagues. So I have been on about once a month, but it's been a while since we've been together. That's true. Good to see you.
That's absolutely right. Well, it is always a pleasure. It's good to see you too. I was looking ahead at some of the questions on the docket. We have some fun ones, some really big ones ahead of you. So now that we are both reunited, I say, what a better way to celebrate than to kick off with some of these really, really fun ones. So let's go ahead without further ado, get those phone lines open. We're going to have an absolutely great show today, and we want each and every one of you to be a part of it. 1-877-511-5483. Again, that call-in number, 1-877-511-5483, or you can email your questions for Canon today, priests@thestationofthecross.com. So let's type up those questions on YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. I know that most of you say, we get the drill, Jordan, but there's always new people, as you can tell, judging by our subscriber and listener number. So again, 1-877-511-5483. All right, off to the races. Oliver in Connecticut had this especially for you, Canon. Oliver says, hypothetically, would it be permissible for a priest to give someone with locked-in syndrome viaticum if the person is in danger of dying, and the priest can reasonably assume the person would request if they were able? If so, would it be permissible to administer the Eucharist via a feeding tube if the person could not physically eat with his mouth?
You might have to help me out about locked-in syndrome, because I am not a healthcare professional. I'm not exactly sure what that is. From the context, it seems like it involves some degree of loss of consciousness. Is that true, do you think, as far as you know? I don't know that particular diagnosis or that technical term.
Fortunately for us both, it looks like our producer Daniel is in the rescue in the chat. He says they can move and are paralyzed. But they can't move. Thank you, Daniel. So they can't move and are paralyzed. Looks like the only way to eat would be via feeding tube or something like that.
Okay, so they can't move, they're paralyzed, but maybe they are conscious, because so when we talk about viaticum, that means the via is the way. It's for somebody who is on the way into eternity, and viaticum refers to the last Holy Communion, or the Holy Communion given in the context of the last rites, which is a more collective term. Though sometimes people use that term when they mean specifically the anointing of the sick. So in terms of the last rites, terms of viaticum, in terms of Holy Communion, two different questions but related in this practical question would be the question of consciousness and the question of whether or not a person is able safely to ingest, to receive the Holy Communion in such a way that there would not be danger of profaning the holy species, and also whether or not the person is a practicing Catholic who wants to receive the sacraments. So a person who is unconscious cannot receive Holy Communion. Now that seems to be different from this locked-in case. A person who is not conscious can receive, however, extreme unction and even absolution, providing that there is no sign before their death that they would have refused the sacrament. So a person who is a Catholic, who identifies as a Catholic, especially if they have a scapular or a rosary in their pocket or one of those cards, I'm a Catholic, call a priest, even if they were not as practicing as they should have been, if they were known to be Catholic and never made some renunciation of the faith, it is assumed, and the Church is a generous mother, the principles of the sacraments are for man, so that we would err on the side of giving a sacrament. So a person could be anointed even while unconscious. But receiving Holy Communion is a little bit different. Of course, they have to be able to swallow safely. So that's where the question of the feeding tube comes in. Now, I saw this question earlier because it was emailed in, so I did a little bit of research into whether the Church has made any judgment about this, and there's a little bit of conflicting information. Certainly, it is the case that you could not somehow treat the Blessed Sacrament or liquefy it such a way that the host itself could be directly fed to a person through a feeding tube. That also would sort of defeat the purpose, because the idea of the Eucharist is that the real presence continues for as long as the species continues. The species meaning the outward form, in this case, the form of bread. After you've received the host at Holy Communion time, after a few minutes, your stomach has digested the host. Of course, the grace of that Holy Communion continues according to the degree of your fervor when you receive communion, but the real presence disappears once the Eucharist is digested, or is digested to an extent that it is no longer recognizable as the Eucharist. So the process of processing the Eucharist through a feeding tube, in addition to the sort of irreverence of it, also would make it such that the real presence would have disappeared by the time it would be in your stomach. It would be as if the first stage of digestion already happened. So it seems that in the late 1950s, the Church did, at experimentum, give some indults here and there for administering a little bit of the precious blood through a feeding tube. However, a document from the U.S. Bishops' Conference, I think 2017, something like that, about the sacramental care of persons with disabilities, mentions that administering the Eucharist through a feeding tube is not permitted at all. Now, whether that's just in the United States, whether that's the case that the Church eventually decided those indults should not be prolonged or expanded, I don't know. But what that document from the bishops recommended is that in the case of a person who is not able to swallow, that they could receive Holy Communion by means of a drop of the precious blood on their tongue. And again, part of the purpose of the way we receive Holy Communion is by consuming the Eucharist, which normally would be the host. There are circumstances in which the faithful could receive the precious blood for somebody with extreme celiac disease, for example, or in this case. So in answer to Oliver's question, it would seem that a person, whether conscious or not, who is being fed by a feeding tube cannot receive viaticum through the feeding tube, but possibly if it's, if their face is not covered with a breathing tube or something, if a drop of the precious blood could be administered, that would be possible, right? And it would seem that would be the only approved method. So.
1-877-511-5483. If you have questions for Canon Altiere today, we definitely want to hear from you. 1-877-511-5483, or email your questions, priests@thestationofthecross.com. And you have this email just popped up. Anonymous here in Illinois says, here in Illinois, I'm not exactly in Illinois. Hey, Anonymous says, what exactly makes someone a heretic, Canon? As Catholics, do we consider all Protestants to be heretics?
Well, that's a good question. The very, very short answer to that question, the second part of the question is yes, Protestants would be considered to be heretics in a very generic sense. But of course, like all of our theological vocabulary, it can be used in a broader way or in a more specific way. The question of heresy, we can answer it in a more objective, or you might say theological sense. We can also talk about it in a canonical sense, the sense of the Church's law or discipline. Obviously, those two interrelate because they're both based on the fundamental concept of truth. So what is heresy in the biggest sense of the word? It comes from a Greek word that means choice. Basically means people, they're choosing what they'll believe as opposed to submitting their intellect entirely to the global content of the Church's teaching. As Catholics, an act of faith means we believe everything that God has revealed and that he teaches through the Church. We might not understand all of it. We might not even know every single doctrine the Church teaches, but whatever the Church teaches, that we believe. That is the act of faith for a Catholic. That is an act of supernatural faith. And a true act of supernatural faith can only be made with God's help and can only end at or terminate at a truth that is actually revealed by God. So to believe something that is not that is contrary to the Church's teaching, or to reject a teaching of the Catholic Church, is heresy in the big sense of the word. We sometimes distinguish what's called material heresy and formal heresy. Formal heresy would be the actual sin of heresy somebody is culpable of. And so the definition of heresy in that sense is the pertinacious denial a truth defined by the church in somebody who is baptized. So, for example, an atheist, a Jew, a Muslim could not be heretics. They are infidels, but they're not heretics because they do not profess Christianity. They're not baptized, so it's not the sin of heresy. Heresy is in a baptized person rejecting one or more teachings defined by the church. And so in the sense of canon law, the crime of heresy, because in addition to being a sin, it's also a crime because it's against the public common good of the church. A person who has been a Catholic who then rejects a teaching of the church, right? So heresy is not just an error because a person could make an error simply because he didn't know any better, but once he's corrected or finds out, oh no, this is what the church really teaches, he submits his intellect. That's not heresy. Heresy is obstinate denial of a revealed truth that is taught by the church. That bears the penalty of excommunication. For a Catholic who then becomes a heretic, there's a penalty of excommunication. A person who is born and raised in Protestantism is, you could say, a small h heretic. Certainly they hold things that are errors against the teaching of the Catholic Church. How heartfelt they may be in that error doesn't make it true, right? Truth is when our intellect conforms to reality, to the way things really are. And so if people believe contradictory things, they can't all be right about that. But a Protestant who is certainly a material heretic is not necessarily guilty of the sin of heresy, and certainly not of the delict, the canonical crime of heresy. That's why when a convert is received into the church from Protestantism, the priest, when he hears their profession of faith, he then says, I lift from you the excommunication which perhaps you may have incurred, right? The Latin adverb is forsitan. Perhaps you have been excommunicated, but the church cannot judge what is in their heart. And so we can't pronounce whether a given Protestant is culpable of the sin of heresy, but certainly the content of their belief system is skewed and it is objectively heretical. Yes, of course.
You're listening to Ask a Priest Live. Canon Francis Altiere joins us today. Absolutely great first segment, and we're going to have, no doubt, an even better segment. Definitely waiting for your question. You can call in even throughout the break. No questions too big, no questions too small. 1-877-511-5483. Again, that's 1-877-511-5483. I'm Jordan Pacheco. Don't go anywhere. Michael from Poland, I see your question on heresy. We'll get to it right after the break. God bless you.
Join the Station of the Cross every Saturday morning at 9 after the 8 a.m. Holy Mass and Sunday afternoons at 2 for a teaching episode on the Catechism of the Catholic Church. You'll learn the essential and fundamental content of our Catholic faith and morals in a complete and concise way with clarity and charity. That's Saturday mornings at 9 and Sunday afternoons at 2 here on the Station of the Cross, Catholic Media Network, and the free iCatholic Radio mobile app.
This is Jesuit Father Robert McTagg, your daily host of the Catholic Current, and I'm asking for your help. Folks have been asking me to answer questions on the air, so I'm asking you to send questions to my mailbag. We can do this good work together. Send us your questions at thestationofthecross.com/askfather. That's thestationofthecross.com/askfather. I look forward to hearing from you.
The Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network is dedicated to answering the critical need of access to quality, consistent, professional, and proven Catholic programming. We cannot rely on other media outlets to properly represent our Church. Catholic radio reaches Catholics, non-Catholic Christians, and non-believers alike. As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent of your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported.
We hear all the time from listeners who discovered the station by seeing a Try God bumper magnet in traffic. You can request a free bumper magnet and start evangelizing just by driving around town. Go to thestationofthecross.com and click on promotional material under the About tab. There you can request a magnet for your listening area. We even have one for the iCatholic Radio mobile app. Request yours today.
You're listening to Ask a Priest Live from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Have a question? Ask a priest. Call 1-877-511-5483 or email us at priests@thestationofthecross.com.
God bless you, listeners and viewers all. Welcome back to Ask a Priest Live. I'm your host, Jordan Pacheco. We're joined today by Canon Francis Altiere, Institute of Christ the King, Sovereign Priest. A lot of great questions trickling through YouTube. I see in particular, we got some really great questions here. So we're going to go ahead and keep those phone lines open. If you have a question for Canon today, best way is just to call in 1-877-511-5483 or email your questions priests@thestationofthecross.com. All right, officially an international show today because Michael from Poland also has a question on heresy. I like how they're back to back. Michael says, Canon, does a secular authority have the moral right to punish for being a heretic, such as being a dissenter? I don't mean idolatry or polytheism, but in this case, I mean preaching heresy.
Well, the way that the question is worded, if we take it at face value, the answer would be no. Now, it says a secular authority. If it had been worded to say a civil authority, in other words, the governmental authority of a country, then the answer could be yes or maybe. So the goal of the job, the mission of the state, which of course receives its authority from God in its own domain, in the world there are two principal authorities. There's the church, which is a supernatural authority whose mission is the glory of God and salvation of souls. And then there is the state, legitimate civil authority, whose mission is the common good in the temporal order, but which is not separate and sealed off from the common good of the church. And now the difference is that there's one universal church, whereas there's not one universal state or empire, but each legitimate state within its purview has to interact with the church. A purely secular state, the answer would be no, because it does not acknowledge in any way its duty to God, or that its authority comes from God, or that it has a relation towards the church in view of promoting the common good of the church. Civil authority as such, however, when it's healthy and when there is a sane commonwealth, such as existed at least to some extent in what we call the regime of Christendom in the pre-modern times, and that lasted into the 20th century in some parts of the world, the state often functioned as what sometimes is called the secular arm of the church, right? So if the state is considered, in a non-religious sense, that's a separate issue, but the state in a Catholic state, right, being the secular arm of the church does not mean that it is secular or indifferent to religion. And so the state as such does not have the power to compel by force a heretic to make an act of faith, which is an internal act. However, the state, to the extent that it has to promote the full common good of man, which also includes his moral good, his spiritual good, and the work of the true church to evangelize, the state does have, or potentially have, the power to restrict the activity of heretics to the extent that that would threaten the common good. And in a Catholic society, imagine Spain, where 95% of people are Catholic, and you have some foreign sect coming in and trying to evangelize with a false religion, that could very much destabilize the common good. Now, the church and state being distinct, right, and having their own authority from God in the supernatural or the natural realm, again, they do have to cooperate. The state as such does not have a sort of a native or inborn authority in matters of religion, but it has, as I said, a potential power in that realm to the extent that the church in a Christendom regime asks for the state to provide her assistance in promoting the common good by, for example, extirpating heresy. And Blessed Charles of Austria, the last sainted monarch that we have, in 1916, when he was crowned as King of Hungary, we have the coronation oath that he recited after he received the crown and the sword, and the bishops would give him these insignia, and then they remind him of his duty as an anointed Christian monarch to promote the common good, and part of it is to extirpate heresy, right? So it's not so much that the state itself, considered as a civil authority, has the right or the mission to extirpate heresy, but in a Catholic society, the state, because the rulers are also Catholic and they're baptized and they have their duty of state to promote the work of the church, they most certainly do have the duty, practically speaking, in as much as the church asks them to do so, to extirpate heresy. Again, not because they're forcing an individual person to make an act of conscience one way or the other, but because the public expression and dissemination of heresy is contrary to the common good, and the state has to promote the common good. Now, if Michael or other listeners are interested in this question, which can seem very abstract, how does that play out in the modern world and different countries with their constitutions? And, there's a difference between a country that, practically speaking, that's 51% Catholic and one that's 99% Catholic. There's an English professor, very bright, Thomas Pink, who's written a number of articles about all of this and very good things about the teaching of Pope Leo XIII and how it shows really that the common doctrine of the church is that the state as such does not have power in religious matters, but it can, as it were, be activated by the church and expected to act as a secular arm for things like promoting the liberty of the church and extirpating heresy, which to us seems world away, right? In the United States, we're just trying to survive as Christians. But the reality is that why are we in this disadvantageous state of being in a defensive rear guard? Precisely because we've allowed ourselves to forget our Catholic principles, which are that you have to defend the citadel, that error as such has no rights. And these things, it's not just, ideas have consequences, right? Ideas have consequences, and when false ideas are allowed to be disseminated in society, it's not just something that a person is, living in their own basement, affected by the rest of society, including believers and those who profess the true faith, are negatively affected by that. And as Catholics, we should have a full understanding of the ideal, even if in the situation which we live now, the ideal is not practically possible to implement.
You're listening to Ask a Priest Live. We're on with Canon Francis Altiere here today. English is difficult, clearly. Institute of Christ King, Sovereign Priest. Going to get those questions in. 1-877-511-5483. Again, that's 1-877-511-5483. Going to take a spin on to YouTube questions that are trickling in. Always good to see you people. And remember, no matter how you listen to the show, whether it's on the radio, the iCatholic radio app, or of course our video feeds, YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble, we are very appreciative. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, especially on YouTube. Looks like we are over 3,600 subscribers and we gained 10 more in a couple of days. So the ball is rolling. So if you haven't subscribed, go on and subscribe. But anyway, KFA on YouTube has this great question regarding sin. Is reading psychological thrillers, murder mysteries, etc. considered sinful? If so, should someone confess it as a venial sin?
Mm-hmm. Well, willingly and knowingly to expose yourself to an occasion of sin, and for different persons, certain things may or not be an occasion of sin, right? That depends on your own past or what could lead you into sin. To expose yourself deliberately to the occasion of sin unnecessarily is a sin. And so in these types, the genre of literature that you mentioned, there could easily be an occasion of sin. And if a person finds that that is the case, then obviously you shouldn't do that. And if you do that, you should confess it. I'm not particularly familiar with the genre of a psychological thriller, so I can't tell you, this book, yes, that book, no. But in as much as literature is art, when you see, for example, something immoral or criminal represented in a work of literature, it's one thing to appreciate the artfulness with which the author presents it, like an Agatha Christie murder mystery, for example. It's another thing to approve of the act in as much as it is a sinful act of, bank robbery or murder or something like that. So these books that the caller mentioned about, that those could potentially be an occasion of sin, and if they are, either because it's particularly egregious and maybe it's not just artfully suggested, but there's a lot of gruesome detail or something like that, that probably is more likely to be an occasion of sin. So I can't give you an abstract yes or no answer, but I would say that in this you have to rely on a well-formed conscience. And for the caller, if that is sort of thing that leads you, for example, to have bad morose thoughts, morose means dwelling on a sinful thought or desire, then yes, that would be an occasion of sin, and you should stop exposing yourself to it, and then, if need be, confess it. But that's not an absolute ban, for example, on reading.
I was about to say, Canon, growing up, I remember, for instance, I like a lot of military history and war books, and there's a couple on my shelf there, but there's kind of a difference between reading like Band of Brothers and then reading something that's far more kind of just gore glorification and that sort of thing, something to keep away from.
Yes, and in the past, up until 1965 or so, the church had something called the Index of Forbidden Books. Usually it was the case because they were philosophical or theological errors, but it also, in some cases, was just very scandalous literature. That no longer exists because after Vatican II, it was thought to be out of keeping the spirit of the times. Also has to be said that practically speaking, now there are so many books that it probably would not even be possible to keep something like that up to date. But in the past, maybe that was easier because you didn't just need a general rule of thumb. There would have been, if there was something that was clearly beyond the pale, you would have found it on the Index of Forbidden Books and you could not read it. If there was a legitimate scholarly interest, you could read it with the permission of your bishop or your confessor, but that index does not exist anymore. So now people have to rely more on a well-formed conscience.
See, my only problem, Canon, is that I like the Catholic League of Decency's kind of movies recommend and not recommend from back in the day. The problem is that a lot of my favorite movies find themselves on that list. So like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is on that list, and I'm like, oh man, I'd have been a rough Catholic in the 1960s if this is on. So
Do you know on what
like
grounds?
That, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Okay. You know what? I will look it up during the break because I was looking kind of through different ones. I think it was, no, actually, I don't remember off the top of my head. Something about some general immorality of something. I mean, it's just kind of a violent movie, but it's not particularly, there's worse kinds, even in the 60s. So I'll definitely see if I can find that during the break. But it was kind of an interesting little piece of trivia that I found. So a very great question, KFA. Hey, thank you so much for sending that in. 1-877-511-5483. Again, that's 1-877-511-5483. Or email your questions for Canon Altiere, priests at thestationofthecross.com, as well as type them up on YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. Again, that call-in number, 1-877-511-5483. We will get back to the questions in just a little bit, but first I have to tell you all that we are getting closer each and every day to the Station of the Cross 25-year anniversary celebration. That's right, friends. We turned 25 years old. They haven't taken us off the air yet. So to celebrate, we're going to have a very wonderful convention, a conference up at Niagara Falls Convention Center. That's going to be on August 24th. Going to be a very, very beautiful day. Going to be a very, very wonderful day. We definitely want as many of you to come along. So go on and get your tickets over at thestationofthecross.com/25. There's going to be an array of really wonderful guest speakers for the day. That's going to include Jim Havens, Mother Miriam, Raymond Arroyo, Candace Owens, Bishop Strickland, Father McTague, and Joe McLean. There's even a special ticket option for a VIP gala dinner. So you'll have a chance not just for good food, but also to mingle with some of our wonderful guest speakers. I'm going to be up there, of course, saying hello. Some of our priests from the show are going to be up there. And of course, you can also meet our producers and all of our other wonderful people who are behind the production of this show. So again, that's going to be August 24th at the Niagara Falls Convention Center in Niagara Falls, New York. Going over to thestationofthecross.com/25. Tickets are limited. And judging by my little ticker right here, there's only 16 days. It looks like tickets do close on August 10th. So go on over again, thestationofthecross.com/25 to go on and get your tickets and registration. 1-877-511-5483. Again, that call-in number, 1-877-511-5483. Don't go anywhere. I'm looking at our head on the docket. It looks like I'm only a few seconds until the music here. But Anonymous from Canada is sending in another question. We also have questions rolling in from Florida, from Texas. It's always kind of fun to look at how many different questions we get from all over the place. So again, keep those questions rolling in. We're already halfway through the show, but there's plenty of show left to do. The easiest way is, of course, to call in with those questions. 1-877-511-5483. And we had this question on YouTube. So just to give a good clarification, you can always rewatch the show as well. YouTube is an absolutely great place where you want to watch previous episodes. Maybe there's a question that you heard and you just want to make sure that you timestamp it and find the place where you can send it to your family and friends. You can also do this on all of our podcasting sites. So we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all the places, guys, literally all the places. And if you like to listen to us via audio in that fashion, please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That's just a very helpful way to support the show, a very helpful way to demonstrate that this is a great place for Catholics and non-Catholics alike to get their questions answered with the fullness of the truth, with clarity and charity. 1-877-511-5483. I'm Jordan Pacheco. Don't go anywhere. Next up, we have a question from Canada about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. I'll see you right after the break.
Download the app to take our programming with you wherever you go. Hear what listeners are saying about the regularly updated iCatholic Radio app.
The programs on iCatholic Radio are uplifting, educational, and have served to deepen my faith as a Catholic. Thank you for this amazing station.
Download the free iCatholic Radio app in your Android or Apple store today. If you already have the app, please consider giving us a 5-star review or telling a friend about it. The month of July is dedicated to the precious blood. O precious blood of Jesus, infinite price paid for the redemption of sinful mankind. O divine blood, drink and laver of souls, standing between us and the Father pleading mercy. With all my heart I adore you, sweet Lord, and offer reparation for the insults, outrages, and ingratitude which you continuously receive from human beings, especially those who dare to blaspheme the divine blood you shed for us. Bless this blood of infinite value. Bless the fire of Jesus' love, who shed it to the last drop for us. Where would I be if not for this divine blood that redeemed me? Indeed, Lord, I have drawn it from you to the last drop. What love! thank you for this saving balm. May every heart, every tongue, now and forever, praise and thank this priceless balm, this saving blood, this fountain of crimson mercy welling up from the fountain of infinite love. Amen.
What you're offering and giving to me, you deserve to get back because you're offering more than I can give.
I learned so much through the Stations on the Cross. I listen to the radio station daily, and I absolutely love it.
I was attending the chapel and places like that, and through your programs, I was able to find out how other Protestants had come back into the Catholic Church. God bless the Station of the Cross.
Donate today at thestationofthecross.com.
Did you know that live video of the show is just a few clicks away? Follow us on Facebook and YouTube at Ask a Priest Live. Search for the Station of the Cross on Rumble. Or check out our Watch Live page at thestationofthecross.com.
God bless you, listeners and viewers all. Welcome back to Ask a Priest Live. I'm your host, Jordan Pacheco. We're joined today by Canon Francis Altiere, Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest. Well, look at that. We're already halfway through the show. A lot of big and small and great questions all trickling through. So go on and get your questions in at 1-877-511-5483. Again, that's 1-877-511-5483. Or email your questions for Canon today, priests@thestationofthecross.com, as well as type them up on YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. YouTube, I can see some more questions for me. We'll get to those in just a moment. But this is a really, really big question. This is anonymous from Canada. They say this: Canon, I am 62, was baptized at birth and raised Catholic. I was confirmed at 13, like most, and graduated high school from a Catholic school. I drifted away from God and religion, got married in a non-Catholic Christian church, obtained a civil divorce, and then married again in a civil ceremony. I am still married. God was on my mind much in recent years, culminating in a profound spiritual experience that put me back on a path to God, and I've been re-educating myself. As I do, I see the Catholic Church increasingly as a home I would like to return to, but I just don't see how. Church doctrine says I'm living in sin and cannot receive the sacrament of the Eucharist. I see no path to return to the church and would appreciate a priest's takes. It seems the only way forward is annulment and remarriage.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's certainly a very, very good question, and it's one that is not uncommon. Many people are in a situation that is similar to that, in the broad lines, at least. Obviously, marriage can sometimes be complicated, and there might be different scenarios. But the first and most important thing is for this anonymous from Canada to stay on the path that you are on, because in order to get to heaven, we don't get there through our own purely human efforts, but every step of the way we cooperate with God's actual grace. That's what enables a non-Catholic to convert to the Catholic faith. That's what enables a sinner to repent. That's what enables the just to persevere and to grow in holiness. So you are receiving a chain of actual graces, and you have started to cooperate with them. So continue on the path that you're on, and you're on a good path, and there is light at the end of that path. You are not, from what you've said in this question, you are not in a situation certainly that is impossible, or even one that has too many obstacles ahead of you. There are obstacles that can be overcome here. Now, to answer this question as it relates to the marriage situation, let's say, what is marriage? Who can get married, and how do you get married? Well, marriage is a lifelong union of one man and one woman for the procreation and upbringing of children, right? Those are the essential aspects of marriage for everyone, whether you're Catholic, whether you're a baptized non-Catholic, whether you're a non-Christian. That is marriage. For two baptized persons, that is also a sacrament, but the sacrament presupposes that there is already a valid natural marriage. So who can get married? Basically, people who are not already married, right? If you are already validly married to somebody, you can't get married to somebody else. That's very important. Now, how do you get married? Well, for non-Catholics, how do you get married? You get married by understanding what marriage is, what your obligations are, and because marriage is a public act, by conforming to all of the legitimate civil regulations related to marriage in the place that you live, and then your marriage becomes a public act, then you're married. That's a valid natural marriage. And even if there are two Protestants, they validly marry in the eyes of the state, whether that happens at the registrar's office or in their own Protestant church, they're validly married. In fact, it's even a sacrament, even though they might not know that. But for a Catholic, because the sacraments are entrusted to the church, Catholics, there are certain regulations, and not just formalities, but again, it's for the common good, because marriage is a public act. We have to have a way of knowing who is married, who's not married. For Catholics, how do we get married? It's what's called the canonical form of marriage, which means making very brief as possible, it means that you get married in your parish church by the parish priest. Could be another priest delegated by the parish priest. But what that means is that for a Catholic to marry or to attempt to marry outside the church, whether that's at the registrar's office or on a beach or in a non-Catholic church, that would be invalid. It's an attempted marriage, but it is not a valid marriage. And that's the case even for somebody who is not a practicing Catholic. Right? The principle in this domain is once a Catholic, always a Catholic. So once you have been baptized as a child into the Catholic Church or received as an adult convert into the Catholic Church, even if you haven't been to lose your faith or lapse or become non-practicing, because law and order are so important, you are still bound by the church's marriage laws. It's even one of the precepts of the church to abide by the church's marriage laws. And so in the case of your anonymous from Canada, because you had been a Catholic, your first marriage outside the church, in fact, was not a valid marriage. The second marriage is a similar scenario. It's you were civilly divorced and then civilly married again a second time. In the question, it says, I'm still married. Legally, yes. In fact, objectively, the eyes of God, in terms of the law of the church, which is God's spokesperson on earth, in fact, you're not married, which might be hard to hear, but in a certain sense is consoling because it makes it much easier in the case of somebody who's in what we call a putative marriage. A putative marriage is somebody has married according to the laws of the church. You did it the right way in church. And at the time, it looked like a real marriage, but maybe later on we learned that there was coercion, or one of the spouses intended not to be faithful or never wanted children. In other words, one of the essential properties of marriage was being excluded. And if that is proven, then we have what's called a decree of nullity. But in the case of this person who was a Catholic but then stopped practicing and attempted to marry outside the church, there's not even a putative marriage, because since it was not done, technical word, in the canonical form, in layman's terms, it was done outside the church, there is not even a presumption that it was a valid marriage. So it certainly was not a real marriage. So therefore, the first divorce, quote unquote, it's not a problem. I mean, spiritually, there might be things that you need to come to terms with there, including in the sacrament of penance, but there is not a legitimate bond that you need to see, is it annulled, is it not annulled? It never existed. Now, the second union, and it seems like the correspondent is still in that second union and would like that to become a true marriage, it's not too difficult, really. You would approach in your diocese, wherever you live, what's called the tribunal, which is the church office responsible for marriage questions. Write them a letter, tell them the situation. They'll probably ask you for your baptismal certificate, your civil marriage license for the first time, the divorce, your second civil marriage license, and they will issue to you what is called a certificate of freedom to marry. I remember I said a moment ago, who can get married? Anybody who's not already married. And since you're not already married in the eyes of the church, obviously you have somebody to whom you would like to be validly married. Therefore, you'll have some form of marriage preparation that your diocese will help you organize. And I can't tell you exactly what that will look like, but they'll sort that out for you in the practical terms. And then you will have a true marriage. The person you're civilly married to now, I think from the context, is not a Catholic, so they'll have to give you permission to have what's called a mixed marriage, although maybe, please God, this person also will want to become a Catholic, and you just have a proper Catholic church wedding. Regardless of how that works out, though, in the short term, it's still possible to regularize this union and make it a valid, at least natural marriage if the other person is not baptized. So it's even less complicated than an annulment because, as I said, there's not even a presumption in favor of the civil unions that you mentioned. So it'll be very easy for the tribunal to give you this certificate of freedom to marry once you've shown them all the paperwork. And I know paperwork's a hassle. People don't like to do it, but there's a good reason for it. So please persevere. You've come this far. You're obviously on a very good pathway. As I mentioned, you're cooperating with all these wonderful graces you're receiving. Go all the way and get the sacramental grace that will come from a good confession, from Holy Communion, and then from potentially what will be the sacrament of marriage. So I'll certainly keep you in my prayers, and but don't be overwhelmed, because it certainly will not be as complicated as you might think at this point that it will be. It'll be pretty straightforward, even though you might have to be a little patient.
Anonymous, we will definitely keep you in our prayers. Thank you for sending that question in, and I'm glad that longing in your heart is definitely to return home to the Catholic Church. So when you are there proper, welcome home. 1-877-511-5483. Again, that call-in number, 1-877-511-5483, or email your questions, priests@thestationofthecross.com, as well as type them up, YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. Gonna get back to YouTube for a moment real quick. It looks like Raymond on YouTube found the reason, Canon, a segment ago, I was talking about how The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was condemned by the Legion of Decency back in the 60s. Raymond says it was condemned because of its distasteful themes, and because evil wins in the end, which, I mean, I suppose that's true. So there you go. So, but what I did discover, though, is that there were different kind of rating systems. So C was condemned, but there are other ones that was like, watch out for Catholics, and other ones that would get a pass. So I got to kind of see where on the scale it falls. But anyway, to this question, Luan asked this great question. Luan says, for the canon, outside of parish duties, how comfortable is the cassock? Do you often get funny looks or fellow Catholics asking you for impromptu confessions or something when they see you at the grocery store?
Impromptu confessions are not terribly frequent. To the extent that people react, it's usually very positive. They'll say, hello, Father. I live in a neighborhood in Bridgeport where it's fairly certain that most of the local people are not Catholic, and they're very, very respectful of the cassock, or they might ask for a prayer. Usually people who are aggressive, one suspects there might also sometimes be sort of mental health issues. Usually people, even if they don't like Catholicism, they don't usually go out of their way to be rude. I have an anecdote that years ago when I was a seminarian and spending some time in France, and France is very, very anti-clerical, has a tradition of that, if you could call it a tradition. And I was out and about and somebody made a very offensive comment. So I sort of pulled my American card and I stopped the person in my worst possible American French-speaking accent. I said to the person, I'm sorry, I'm just visiting your country. I don't speak French very well. Could you please very, very slowly repeat what you said? And they were so embarrassed and ashamed that they apologized profusely for the insult they had just made. But unfortunately, a lot of people today don't know what the cassock is. I hardly ever get insults, but you'll often get references to the Matrix or something like that. One of my, and this is sad, one of my converts today, a fellow priest in the Institute, was telling me he was at an art museum earlier today, and the tour guide asked him what he was, and he said he was a Catholic priest and was explaining the collar, and this tour guide said that she had been raised as a Catholic and went to 12 years of Catholic school, but didn't know what a priest was. So that to me is more, I would rather be insulted on the street by a Southern Baptist and earn some merit rather than be saddened to know that our own Catholic people today are so poorly educated sometimes. But the summer can sometimes be a bit of a challenge in the cassock, but I'm wearing now a very, very lightweight summer cassock. Right? You can also sometimes get permission to wear a white cassock in the summertime or in hot countries.
Canon, I'm going to have to send you this article, and maybe I'll link it for everybody. It's a really interesting article. I think it was The Atlantic, but it was one of their writers decided to go out into society wearing what he called 3 uniforms of society. One was a doctor, one was kind of a security guard looking guy, and the other was a priest. And the rules was that he wasn't going to lie. If someone asked him what he was, he wouldn't be like, oh yeah, I am a Catholic priest, or I am a doctor or something. And what he discovered is how society treats differences and kind of if you're dressed for the role. But what he found the most impactful was dressing as a priest. And he would just like go places. He wouldn't like introduce himself. He just like kind of mind his own business. He said that what he discovered is that he got the most looks. He also got the most interaction from people. And there was a desire from people to come say something, touch him, like just reach out. And he'd have people run up and just say, Father, pray for me, run away. So I don't know if you've had that experience as well, but I'm sure that's common when you're wearing a cassock.
That does happen. That happened just recently. I was on a boat crossing the Long Island Sound on a day trip. Here's a very beautiful story. You've probably heard it before, but since we're talking about the cassock, we're talking about that undercover reporter of yours, and then movies we were talking about. You probably heard the story of the conversion of Sir Alec Guinness, who's one of our converts. And I forget now what movie it was that he was filming, but in France, between scenes, he was still wearing his cassock. It was Father Brown, I think, is one of the Father Brown mysteries.
Yeah.
And just in the village, a little child came up to him and asked for a blessing, or just even held his hand. And he was so moved by saying, "What is this religion where people have this empathy, this feeling towards their clergy of comfort and admiration?" So he began to study the Catholic faith, and then he became a Catholic. So that's a very nice story.
That is, hopefully that movie's not been condemned, because I've been trying to find Alec Guinness's Father Brown for a while now. So I will find it and I'll let everybody know. But a very beautiful story indeed. 1-877-511-5483. Canon Francis Altiere joins us today on Ask Your Priest Live. The music is fast approaching, which means we're only going to have one more segment of the show left. So if you want to get your questions in, my recommendation is to call in, and you can call in even throughout the break. That phone line is wide open. 1-877-511-5483. In fact, now thinking about it, I don't think we've actually had a call all hour. Now that's okay, because judging by how many emails and YouTube questions we got, we still have plenty of show left to do. But nonetheless, go on and call in if you really want to get that question in. 1-877-511-5483. Again, 1-877-511-5483. Well, look at that. Ask and ye shall receive. Ignatius from New York, I see that your call is on the line, so we're going to go ahead and be right up with you after the break. I think I see another call trickling through too. See, I always tell you people every single episode, do yourselves a favor and call in early instead of in the last 5 or 4 minutes of show, so we have plenty of time to answer your question. 1-877-511-5483, or of course you can email those questions, priests@thestationofthecross.com, as well as type them up on YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. Luan says the story with Alec Guinness comes from 1954's The Detective. We're going to research that throughout the break, and Ignatius will be right up with you right after the break. God bless you.
This is Jesuit Father Robert McTague, your dearly host of the Catholic Current. Join me on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern to reconnect with Dr. Michael Bacalek. We'll be talking about rescuing faith and reason in this time of crisis. What should we be ready to do? Hear it all in the Catholic Current on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, coming to you from the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Coming up Thursday on The Simple Truth, live at 4 p.m. Eastern, Dr. John Mark Miravalli is back with us to discuss part 2 of his book, Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters. We'll be discussing the fine arts, including the nature of fine art generally, the purpose of the arts, and the moral obligations of artists as such, along with much more on The Simple Truth, live at 4 p.m. Eastern.
Here at the Station of the Cross, we proudly bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners through radio and mobile devices, and we're grateful for the feedback we've received.
Catholic radio has just been a lifesaver for me. I start my day with it. I listen to it all day long as much as I can. There's always people calling in with people who've lost children, and I love what everyone has to say and the advice of the Catholic Church and how to deal with suffering. It has given me the strength to get through the day and to get out of bed each morning. I am very grateful for it.
Catholic radio to me has been very informative on my religion. It has informed me of many things that I wasn't aware of or should have been aware of, and I've enjoyed it very much listening to it.
If you've been blessed by listening to the Station of the Cross, let us know. Call 1-877-888-6279, extension 112. Then share your testimonial with us.
Enjoying the show? Catch up on podcasts of past episodes on your favorite platform. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, TuneIn, and the free iCatholic Radio mobile app.
God bless you, listeners and viewers all. Welcome back to Ask a Priest Live. I'm your host, Jordan Pacheco. We're joined today by Canon Francis Altiere, Institute of Christ King, Sovereign Priest. This is our last segment. We have 2 calls on the docket. So if you want to get in, go on and get that call in at 1-877-511-5483. Ignatius, we're about to get to you. Real quick, just wanted to say that, yes, Luan, you're totally right. That Father Brown movie starring Alec Guinness is called The Detective. And if y'all have Tubi, it's on Tubi. So guess what I'm going to watch after the show. But anyway, hey, Ignatius, thank you so much for calling in. And what is your question for Canon?
Oh, hey, how's it going? I had a question about Palomism. I know in the Orthodox Church, they believe in uncreated energies, or that's how according to some Orthodox as uncreated energies, and there's some Eastern Catholic sects that honor Archbishop Palomas as a saint. I was wondering what the position on Palomism is in the Roman Rite, because that appears to be, I think it kind of contradicts some Catholic teachings, the idea that the divine essence exists as multiple energies, as, opposed to, just the singular divine essence. So I was wondering what the Roman Catholic teaching was on Palomism.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ignatius, that's certainly a very deep question. I'm afraid off the cuff, there's not a whole lot I can tell you because I don't want to say anything that's false or misleading. One thing that certainly is true is that there can be suspect or poorly expressed ideas with an author who is otherwise orthodox, and you take the good and leave the bad. Origen, for example, one reason why he's not Saint Origen or Father of the Church is because there were some of his ideas that went astray and were condemned, even though the bulk of his teaching and biblical interpretation was very influential in the church. And so something similar might be the case with Gregory Palamas. Now, it is true, and it's not just a liturgical question of Roman or Eastern, it is Orthodox, small o Orthodox Catholic teaching that God is absolutely simple. And so there can be no real distinction within God of any kind. There can be sometimes we call a virtual distinction or sometimes a logical distinction, but it's true that there cannot be, as this theory would hold, an energy emanating from God that is worshipped as being divine that is not identical with the divine essence. So that I can't tell you in more detail about because I don't want to bloviate about something I'm not an expert on, but certainly the absolute simplicity of God is Catholic doctrine. And so a hypothesis about a divine energy separate from God would not be admissible for any Catholic of any right.
Very interesting question indeed, Ignatius. Hey, thank you so much for sending that in. Gonna stay in New York, this time in Rochester, and Michelle joins us. Hello, Michelle. Thank you so much for calling into the show. And what's your question for Canon?
Hi, my question is, my husband and I we are married in a civil ceremony. We'd both been previously married before in a Catholic church. I'm cradle Catholic. My husband is not, but he wants to convert now. So we're both in the process of applying for our annulments. We're like at the tail end of it. I already got my affirmation letter. They have grounds for him. He's at the tail end of his. But my question is, when I was talking to the canon priest in my interview, I had a reversion to my faith, since I was married to him, and I went to confession. And, now I'm coming to the reality that I should not be receiving any of the sacraments until I get this annulment. And I said, is the, reconciliation that I went to, is that invalid because I should not have gone? And they didn't give me an answer. They said, well, I'm not really sure. I wouldn't say that. So that's my number one question. And number two is, could at least I right now, am I allowed to go to confession if we are living like as brother and sister and not having any relations?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you, Michelle, for that question. And of course, we know these are difficult crosses for people to bear. But with God's grace, it's always possible to do what he expects of us, right? Sometimes it's challenging, and sometimes God does expect heroism, and he always gives us the grace that we need to be heroic in following the moral law. So there are several principles at play here. Again, I'm not your confessor, and I can't speculate about individual details, but basic principles that we should understand that a decree of nullity is not simply a technicality, but that all moral action that's pleasing to God has to be based on reality, or on truth, in other words. And so when it comes to marriage, a person is married or a person is not married. And for persons who were married in the Catholic Church, as I alluded to with a previous marriage question this evening, we presume that that is a valid marriage. So when there is a tribunal procedure to judge whether or not a putative or a supposed marriage was in fact valid, we're trying to establish the truth of the matter, not necessarily to get the outcome we want. That's why, although it's easier to say the word annulment than the mouthful decree of nullity, annulment is very misleading as a word because it implies that there was a real marriage, and what we want the church to do is to annul it, right? To make it so that it doesn't exist anymore, to retroactively make that it didn't exist. Well, reality means that either a marriage did exist or it didn't, right? If it was done according to the rules of the church, we assume it existed until proven contrary. And so the purpose of a tribunal procedure is to see, well, maybe this wedding that looked like a valid marriage, maybe it wasn't. And then if that can be established beyond reasonable doubt, then you have what's called a decree of nullity. So for a person who is in a putative marriage, it would be morally wrong to live in such a way that expressed a contrary reality. In other words, to be pretending to live in a married state with somebody else who might not be your legitimate spouse, or to be even, for example, in a courtship with somebody because you're hoping that you'll get the annulment. When I say you, I don't mean you in particular, I mean one, right? This this sort of thing works. So our goal is to find the truth and to live in conformity with it. From our point of view, what we want might be the thing that's easiest or that will allow us to have what we want, which is we want the annulment. We want to be able to regularize the union we're in now. What we should really want is, and that's what the definition of holiness is, conformity of our will with God's will, which is always based on his truth. It's based on reality. And so while your procedure is being judged by the church, and it may well be, and it sounds from what you said like it's moving the direction that they are have grounds to judge maybe that your previous union was not a valid marriage, in which case you would be free to get married, assuming that the man you mentioned is also free to get married. At that point, obviously, there's no problem. But up until that point, you have to still do your best to live in a morally pleasing way, again, because the moral life, the Catholic life, is not one of technicalities. We're just trying to follow the law or trying to skirt the law and still do what we want to as much as possible. We want to be good. We want to follow God's will, which is sometimes hard to do, but it's always good for us, right? Because whatever is founded on truth and what conforms to God's will, it is good, and therefore it is good for us. And so in a situation like you're in, you want to know, can I go to confession? Can I receive Holy Communion? Again, it's not just, a technicality or what will the rules let me do. It's how can I be morally certain that I'm in the state of grace so that I can receive these sacraments? To go to confession means that we are truly sorry for any objectively serious sins that we remember having committed since our last good confession. And to be truly sorry, I was going to say seriously sorry, and it came out as a new word, but to be truly sorry means that we're willing to do what is ever necessary to avoid the occasion of sin, right? So for a couple who certainly are not married to each other, and that's objectively the case you're in now, right? We hope that it will be the case that you and your man you're civilly married to, we hope that you will be free to marry each other once the tribunals make their decision, and then everything will be easier after that point. But until that point, you cannot live with each other as if you were married to each other, nor even engage in a sort of courtship situation. So normally the morally acceptable thing to do is to separate from each other, separate residences, separate and live the reality that you're not married to each other. There could be cases that make that more difficult, like financial dependence, or you're raising small children together. In that case, it would be morally acceptable, as you say, to live as brother and sister under the same roof, while making all safeguards not to fall into sin together. And if that is done, and you discuss it with the confessor, you are doing what you can to avoid the occasion of sin. You're not living in a state of sin. You could then receive the sacraments, but until such time as you're willing to be worthy of valid absolution by making the necessary safeguards, it would not be appropriate to receive the sacraments in a sort of way that's just an optical illusion. So I know it's difficult. We'll pray for you, but you can certainly do what you need to do. So just be patient while the tribunal judges the case, and then
God bless you, everyone. Father John Brantich joins us tomorrow. See you on tomorrow, 6 p.m.
Hey guys, Jim Havens here. I want to invite you to the Station of the Cross 25-year anniversary celebration. You can join us at the Niagara Falls Convention